We're on. Okay, we're live. Hi, good morning. By the way, today I have on the t-shirt that I bought in Salvador de Bahia when I visited Brazil. Just such a sunny place, beautiful beaches, nice restaurants, a little bit challenged in terms of the amount of favela. Just such a sunny place, beautiful beaches. Okay. So I have wonderful memories of my visit to Brazil. But today I want to talk about something that happened on the weekend. So my wife went to visit her sister. In fact, I drove her there. Her sister lives on the outskirts of LA. And we had a Chinese meal there, and then I drove home. And so I'm on my own for a few days. And so I decided I would basically have this, composite laminated floor that I would clean it. Normally I just vacuum or sweep. And did a bunch of stuff around the house. The net result of which is, and then I hit some balls on the driving range, and I went and worked out at the gym. And then I cooked up some dinner. All in all, I listened to 5 hours of Arabic, 5 hours. Now, I think the average marathon, the winners, they run in 2 hours and a half or something. But the average ordinary person who participates in a marathon may take 4 or 5 hours to complete the marathon. And there's no question that 5 hours of concentrated listening while doing other tasks, is kind of bombarding your brain with the language. Now, I was listening to material that I had read and listened to before, our mini stories, but the mini stories are full of the structure of the language, the grammar of the language, the most common verbs of the language. It's not very interesting to me, except that I am focused on getting a better sense of how the language works, which is something that I like to do, despite, my belief in compelling content. And sometimes I think I'm kind of getting less and less out of these mini stories every time I listen to them. So I do try to go forward, but in the case of Arabic, it's difficult because there's a big gap between what I can comfortably deal with and the more difficult content. So at any rate, I listened to 5 hours, and it says so on my stats. And I know in Japan at one point they had this sort of listening marathon, was a bit of a slogan. And they encourage people to listen for 1,000 hours. And if you get to that point, then again, it's all about, getting the language to penetrate your brain, because you have to rely on the brain to a large extent through reading and listening to start picking up on things. Because it's kind of more difficult to consciously put the knowledge of the language in our brain. Like, here's this grammar rule, and here is this list of words, and we're going to put them in our brain. It doesn't quite happen that way. It happens through this process of absorption and assimilation. Now, I'll show you. So I just wonder how people feel. Maybe we should run some kind of a listening marathon at LingQ, whether it be, amount of listening in a month, in a day, in a week. Push people to listen more, because every time I've had those of you here, my viewers, say, please analyze my profile at LingQ, what I find every time is that people don't listen enough. Now, it is possible that you're doing your listening outside of LingQ. So, if you have an audiobook or you have some other material, you're listening in iTunes or you're listening somewhere else, then LingQ is not keeping track of it, although you can manually add that in. The advantage with the playlists, and that's why I have become a big fan of the playlists, is that the system will automatically track when you open the lesson and listen, and when you listen on your playlists. So if you listen 10, 15 times to these different stories, that all adds up to the total amount of listening that you're doing. So I always make a point, if I study a lesson on LingQ that has audio, then I add that to a playlist, and I kind of get rid of some of my older playlists. We can only keep 100 items, unfortunately, in the playlist, but I remove some and put the new guys in there. So that's kind of my thought, this sort of listening marathon. I don't know where we go with that. We've had our, we have our 90-day challenges and different kinds of challenges. By the way, another thing I thought I would do when I finish my 90-day challenge here of Arabic and Persian at the end of April, then the whole month of May is going to be my Slavic languages challenge, 30 days, particularly Russian and Ukrainian, since I'm going to visit Ukraine in the second half of May. And my goal is to improve my accuracy in the language, because Slavic languages, a lot of it has to do with sort of accurate use of cases, accurate use of verbs of motion, accurate use of verb aspects. Those are sort of the three things, you know. Yeah, I can acquire more words, but I would like to be more accurate. So month of May, I'm going to try to focus on becoming more accurate in Russian, Ukrainian. I might even touch a bit on Polish. Anyway, let me just have a look at this issue of the listening marathon and look at my statistics. So let's just share the screen here. So, okay, one of the problems, by the way, that I've had, and I don't know if anyone can help me, is, you know, I bought this audiobook, The 7 Secrets of Highly Effective People, in Arabic, but I can't get it into LingQ, and I'm trying to figure out how to do it. I bought the audiobook at audible.com, and I bought the ebook at Amazon, so it's in my Kindle, but I just can't figure out how I get it. I tried this, someone sent me this PDF file, but this is not in a format that I can import into LingQ, so I'm kind of stuck there. If anyone has any suggestions, that would be much appreciated. Now, if I go here, there was discussion of it on our forum as well, but if I look at my, let's go at Arabic here, and if I look at my profile, and so last week I listened 5.7 hours. Most of that was yesterday. So if I look at the last 3 months, 42 hours of listening, a little bit below my target. I should increase my listening. Now, I do have some items that are on an iTunes playlist that haven't been added in here. That's not a lot. If in Japan they're running this marathon, 1,000 hours of listening, that's like almost 100 hours a month, and I'm not doing that. I'm only doing 15 hours a month. Let's say in the last 6 months. So yeah, I'm running 10 hours a month of listening. 10 hours a month, that's still, when you think of it, you know, that's 10 hours a month. That's a little over 2 hours a week, which is, you know, a half hour a day or so, missing a day or so. So I don't know what we can do with this, whether we should try to run some kind of a marathon, really go for just listening in order to increase the awareness of the importance of listening. Okay, so I just wanted to talk about the idea that we force ourselves to do more listening, either to have a 5-hour day of listening. I mean, obviously, if you listen 5 hours a day, every day, that would be an awful lot of listening. That's 35 hours a week. That would get us up to that 100 a month. That would get you up to that 1,000 in a year. I'm sure that would have a major impact on our sort of sense of the language. There's also the issue of what we would listen to. To some extent, we can listen to you know, things like the mini stories where we're focusing on the structure of the language, the grammar, but we also have to have this more interesting material. Again, this whole issue of repetition and novelty for the brain. So that's kind of what I wanted to say, get your impressions on. And now I am going to have a look at the questions. All right. What do you think about talking to yourself to improve the way you speak in a foreign language? I haven't really done that. I mean, occasionally, of course, you find yourself repeating certain phrases. But if you're talking about, okay, so talking to yourself, so you have a dedicated amount of time you can spend on a language. It's, you know, an hour a day or whatever. So I am going to spend that time. So if it's not dedicated learning time, if it's in the car, cleaning house, then I'm listening. If it's dedicated learning time, I'm reading and linking. Am I going to take time away from that to speak? I don't think so. But other people do that, fine. What are some of the most pleasant experiences you've had thanks to a foreign language? Maybe I thought this is why I learn languages. Lots of them. Most recently in Vancouver, if I say a few words of Persian to a store clerk, they're delighted to hear me, however poorly I speak Persian. You know, conversations with taxi drivers in Morocco, traveling in Romania with my driver, and we were speaking Romanian. Obviously, living in Japan for 9 years, doing business in Japan, driving with my customer for an hour on the expressway, and we were just talking about all kinds of subjects. It comes a point where you're not even aware that you're speaking a foreign language, especially with Japan. Like, I just had customers. I had one guy in Nagoya who bought newsprint. I had to go down there. He liked to discuss philosophy, and we would sit there in his Japanese restaurant and finish a bottle of whiskey, and he would talk philosophy in Japanese. I guess you move from that sort of sense of, wow, look at me, I'm speaking a foreign language, to where you're just communicating. And then at that point, it's no longer that sense of, wow, it's just you are able to communicate with more different people. It's fun to be with Chinese people, with French people, with Spanish people, I'm looking forward to going to Ukraine and speaking Russian and Ukrainian. And it just opens up more channels of communication. I can't think of one particular incident or experience. Yeah, Mateo says you can't speak to yourself for very long. Hello, Bangladesh. Do you think Article 13 will have any impact on linkage to the EU Copyright Directive requiring proactive copyright filters? I mean, I don't know whether it would affect us. Obviously, we try to stress on people that they shouldn't upload things for which they don't have the copyright. When we are made aware of them, we remove them. I don't know anything more than that. Why, when we are talking to ourselves, we can keep a long conversation, then we start to think we are not good at learning? When we talk with people, we do it well. Yeah, it's difficult to speak to yourself. I mean, what are you going to talk about? Again, there's so many different things that people do. It's not for me to say that it's a good idea or not a good idea. Yeah, I had an April Fool's video where I announced that I was going to stop trying to learn any more languages because English was good enough or something like that. Yeah. First time live. Okay, yeah. Karine says she drives long haul, and so lots of chance to listen. I agree with you. Hi from Morocco. You know what? I really enjoyed visiting Morocco. Quite different from what I expected. Much greener. I had this idea that Morocco was some kind of dry place on the edge of the desert. When we took a bus from Fez up to Chefchaouen, it was all green. Rich agriculture, and of course, a different culture, very much different culture, but very interesting, friendly people. Steve, I never see you speak Arabic. I will. سأتحدث عند أشعر أستطيع أن أفعل أستطيع أن أتحدث أكثر بالطلاقة. Right now, my Arabic is not so good, but I will. Was there a noticeable improvement in your comprehension after the... I have this sense that I had a greater sense of how the language works. I wasn't adding words. I was perhaps confirming some words. Time will tell. I mean, there's so many things that I think so many things in language learning that you don't get an immediate sort of effect. It's like this idea that, like, I believe, for example, that learning Persian and Arabic together Of course, it limits my improvement in either one, but I think it makes my brain more attentive to language, period. I notice things better, and I think it's going to be very good for me in terms of training my brain for dealing with a variety of languages, sounds, ways of expressing things, and so forth. Okay, Ian, thank you. I have Calibre, but I can't get the file out of Kindle into Calibre. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. Oh, have you heard about Matt Vias? He's a polyglot who's telling his quickly growing following that you don't need comprehensible input and you should meditate 6 months before starting to study. I won't be trying that, but there's all kinds of different ways that work for people. Okay, I think the best method for learning grammar is to just get some short text and examine every sentence using some short grammar book. The trouble with that is you can understand, if we talk, for example, Slavic languages, you can understand the reasons for the different cases, or a little more difficult to understand the aspects of verbs, but to actually produce it every time you use the language, that's difficult. And that's where you have to train certain habits. And that's where listening and reading is so powerful, and eventually speaking. Listening, I mean listening without reading, just listening. I don't do a lot of listening while reading. I do some with Arabic because the Arabic script is still so foreign to me. But otherwise, when I read and link. And when I listen, I'm doing something else. I find that the great advantage of listening is that you can do it while doing other things. You become a hero to your wife because you're much more willing to do household chores while listening. Okay, can't afford to join link. I mean, there's not much we can do really for people who can't afford the $10 a month. I'll wait till you can't afford it. In the meantime, you're welcome to download whatever we have at LingQ and use it for your own purposes. I took your advice and talked to a teacher on Italy's. I taught you great advice. When you talk about listening and reading, how important it is? Do you first read, or do you listen and then read, or whatever? I do both. Sometimes I listen first in order to become curious. Curiosity is a great motivator. So if I listen and I really don't understand it, then I'm quite curious to read it and look up the words. And sometimes I read first and look up the words and review the words, and then I listen, then I go back to read. I don't think it really matters. I'm from Ceará, Brazil, Japan. Hi, można po-ruski da yamagu. The easiest Kindle is use the desktop Kindle application. Okay, Ian, I downloaded the desktop Kindle application, and then I tried to open this Arabic book and the 7 habits, and they told me that they don't support. I can't remember what they said, but my system doesn't handle this or something like that. So it doesn't seem to want to read the Arabic font, so then it sends you off to all these help places where you just get a lot of standard answers. Okay, if I put 5 hours a day into reading and listening French every day, can I get the B2 level after 5 months? I don't know, Luca. I don't know what your native language is. But I think if you put in 5 hours a day, there's a very good chance that you will get to B2. You say you never review words on their own. Then how do you review new words? No. I say I review randomly, and I review when I turn the page in a lesson. So or sometimes you'll see the little yellow link number at the top of a lesson that tells you how many yellow links there are there. 10 or 20 or whatever, and I'll go through those. So it's very much of a random thing related to a content that I'm listening to and studying. If you listen and you don't understand, what do? Continue listening and eventually you'll understand? No, I don't recommend that at all. I find that is very inefficient. I have been listening to this Arabic the 7 secrets of highly successful people, because the voice is pleasant, and that's so important. It's pleasant to listen to, and I pick up stuff. But I'm now very motivated to read that. And so ultimately, when you listen, you don't understand, that's good, because now you're curious to read it. So I want to listen to stuff where I can access the text and hopefully try to get, to where I understand more of it. Don't just listen and listen and listen and hope you're going to get somewhere. I think that's a very, very inefficient approach. Очень сильно помогли вы, очень хороший человек, спасибо вам. Я не знаю. Мы все хорошие. Anyway, what do you think about reading books with parallel text? There are books in Greek with the English text right below it. Using LingQ for Greek and really liking it. Yeah, I mean, it's another way of doing it, especially at the early stages. Eventually, I like to get into the target language alone. But by the way, I did enjoy LingQ for Greek, and I enjoyed our many stories which were done for us by a guy who I found on Upwork, and I thought he did a great job. Being able to hold a conversational language and reading pretty well, but not being able to understand the news or very fast spoken TV shows, being at a high level or not. Well, I think you can be at B2 and have trouble following TV shows. There's that whole range between B1 and B2. Like a strong B2 should be able to understand spoken TV shows, but it takes a long time to get from B1 to B2. B1, you can kind of converse. B2, you should be able to understand TV shows. So I would say you're at B1.5. If you can, reading is easier. Hold a conversation depends on what the subject matter is. But to understand the news and spoken TV, yeah, that requires B2, in my opinion. What do you think about watching movies with subs in the same language? I think that's a good thing to do. What's even better is if you can access those movies with subs and using our LingQ extension, import it, from the browser, import it into LingQ, then you can actually review the text and take the time to learn some of the words that are there. What tips do you have for speaking to your first tutor ever? I would say, first of all, relax. I think the onus is on the tutor to make you feel comfortable, to get you to speak, to ask you questions, to to keep track of your mistakes, to send you a good report, hopefully with audio as well, and just to keep you talking. Yes, I learned Korean, but I don't speak it as well as I would like, and I'm going to get back to Korean. How important is it to be focused when listening? I find my mind sometimes drift. Yeah, you're going to drift. Like it's not possible to be totally focused, but that's where, if it's 5 hours, you're going to fade in and out, but a lot of it is going to remain. So I don't think you should be too concerned about staying focused. Allow yourself to be unfocused. Okay. Looks like we don't have an awful lot more. We have no more questions. So with that, I'm going to get off early today. Again, to my Brazilian friends, I sure enjoyed visiting Brazil. Blah, blah, blah. Корейский язык сложный. Да, очень сложный. Is Korean difficult? I found it very difficult. But LingQ is better now. And plus we have the mini stories in Korean. So I'm determined to get back to Korean and take myself up to a higher level than I am at right now. How many novels approximately you read in languages that you speak the best? Well, I mean, I've read lots of novels in French. I've read a couple of novels in Chinese, Japanese. I've read more novels in Spanish, German, Swedish, not so much novels, but history books. I can't tell you how many. Dutch. Yeah, I've looked at Dutch. It's just not a priority, but I feel I could learn it fairly quickly. Yeah, no immediate plans. Would you rate some languages as harder than others? Absolutely, absolutely. And the best example of all is Persian and Arabic. Persian is, for me, as a speaker of Indo-European languages, Persian is much easier than Arabic. The writing system is more consistent. The structure is more similar to languages that I have been exposed to. So for me, there's no question that Persian is much easier than Arabic. But I think it's largely a function of which languages you already know. So maybe they're not absolutely more difficult, but relative to languages you know, those that are similar to languages that you know are typically going to be easier. Какой самый сложный язык, который вы учите? You can't say. Like I'm finding Arabic quite difficult. Chinese have the problem of characters. Slavic languages have the problems. Slavic languages have, in a way, the most finicky grammar. Little details that you have to try to master in order to speak correctly. And that's what I'm going to focus on in the month of May. What do you think of envy in the polyglot community and the topic of quality versus quantity in language learning? Okay, I'm not aware of the envy in the polyglot community. It might be there. When I hear someone speak different languages well, I am full of admiration. I think it's wonderful. When I attend these polyglot conferences, I do not have the impression that there's envy. I find that there is a lot of mutual support and mutual admiration, whether the person speaks 2 languages, 3 languages, 8 languages. I don't think, at least I'm not aware of that as a factor. I made a new goal of reading 3 hours a day on LingQ for 4 weeks, and I found it made a big improvement to my speaking. It's great. I'm not sure why this is. You know what, Jason Ayerman, you have to, Stephen Crash is a very serious person. The fact is that when we have meaningful input, listening, reading, we are sending signals to the brain has to deal with it, create neural networks to deal with this new language. That is essentially how we increase at least our potential in the language. Now, ultimately to speak, you have to start outputting all of that, but you got to build up this capability, which is vocabulary, which is familiarity with the structure. And that's done through listening and reading. So it's not surprising that if you do a lot of it every day, you will improve. That's always been my experience. Do you listen to podcasts for your Japanese? No, Japanese, because, when I was in Japan, they didn't have podcasts. I did a lot of listening to, I had this cassette tape series, for example, from NHK, the national broadcaster in Japan, on Showa no Kiroku, the history of the Showa era, which I listened to many, many, many times, long before, Stephen Krashen. I had this sort of naturally realized that reading and listening is a very powerful way of learning. Do you know other polyglots who use the same method as you? I think all polyglots, starting from Kato Lam in the 20th century, famous Hungarian polyglot lady, rely on input. Whatever other things they do, they all rely on input as the main way that a language that is new to you can come into you. Do you use Google? Do you know? Do you use Google Translate? Oh, Google Translate, I use it. One of the problems with Persian is, but I use Google Translate for Persian. It's okay. I have, in fact, I have uploaded, if you look in LingQ, there's 3 other dictionaries, I can't remember their names, that I use for Persian. Google Translate seems to be the best. It's a problem. I would say, so far I've found Persian the language that has the least dictionary support, but I'm managing. I'm learning Persian faster than Arabic, simply because Persian is easier. Have you ever heard about virtually native? He says that reading is much more important than listening. I can only talk about my own experience. First of all, listening is something I can do while doing other things. I can listen in the car, I can listen while exercising, I can listen while cleaning up. And so that dramatically increases the time available for language learning. Now, even if theoretically reading is better, and I'm not sure it is, that means I have to sit down and read. I can't read while driving. I can't read while exercising. So practically, from a practical point of view, listening is the most powerful learning activity because it's so portable. Second of all, I find that if I read and listen, or listen and read, the two reinforce each other, and therefore they have to be looked at together. When I read, I am almost, not really subconsciously, I'm sub-vocalizing. I have to have some sense of how those words are pronounced. And so therefore, if I listen before reading, then it gives me more momentum for my reading. I find that reading increases your vocabulary, but listening prepares you for speaking. So I think they are both important. Have you heard about that? I'm wondering where to find interesting content. Interesting content in which language? I'll sometimes use Google Translate to translate the subject matter that I'm interested in into the target language, and then Google and see what I can find. What language took you the longest to learn? Well, I've been a long time with Korean, and I'm nowhere near where I want to be. El truco para aprender idiomas, ¿cuál es? Hay muchos. There's many, but there's no real truco. There's no real trick. It's escuchar y leer. Mucho. To learn German, is it useful to use a dictionary? You know, to me, a dictionary is a tool you get in and out of in order to get through the content that you're reading and listening to. You won't get a real good sense of the scope of words, the scope of meaning, until you've had a lot of exposure to the language. So dictionaries are there. I don't use the traditional dictionary because it takes too long to look up a dictionary, and then we forget immediately. As soon as we close the dictionary, we forget. That's why I prefer to use online tools, online dictionaries, and stay in the content and get at more content, and eventually I get a sense of what the words mean. Сколько вы языков учили? Lots. 20. Don't speak them all. 안녕하세요. How important you say it is as a beginner to hit the tones right in Chinese? You won't hit the tones right in Chinese. As a beginner, it takes a long time for the brain to get used to these tones. And if you deal with them as phrases and you get the rhythm of the language, your tones will gradually improve. Aref, I have to admit that, Arabic script shows up as such small font. And given the difficulty that I have reading Arabic, I can't necessarily do it on the fly. Oh no, this is Persian. Chand waqt, waqti, Farsi, boyad, migyardi. Anyway, do you have languages that when you started it felt right and it came easier to you? Not really. They all have their difficulties. Why do we speak so well with some natives but we struggle with others? If the language is the same in this case, no. Okay, emotions are very important. It's important when we listen that we enjoy the voice. It's important that we enjoy the content. And some people make us feel comfortable. They sort of send out signals that give us confidence. And some people make us stressful. And so it's absolutely true that it's easier to speak with some people than with others. This shirt is from Salvador de Bahia. We enjoyed it there. We flew into Salvador from Rio. First day went down to the lower town, wandered around a bit, took the elevator up to the top area, the historical part of Bahia. It's a Portuguese colonial town, lots of history. Probably the street sellers there are a little more aggressive than other parts of Brazil. But all in all, we explored restaurants near our hotel. And music, like we walked from our hotel to a restaurant that was recommended, and there were cafes with live bands, and there's just so much music in Brazil. We enjoyed it. Let's see, what else do we have? How do you memorize? Do you think there is a relationship between age and language learning ability? I'm 73. I think I'm a better language learner now than when I was in my 20s. I think that as a general rule, it's like anything else. If you compare, for example, if I were to take up a new sport at my age, I would have more difficulty because the body, is not as supple as it once was. But when it comes to language learning, you just have to activate the brain and you can learn at any age. How do you memorize words? I don't memorize. I make no effort to memorize. It's simply through the exposure to the language, through listening and reading, occasional random review of words, that gradually, all of a sudden, I know more words. My statistics at LingQ tell me I know more words, and I find that my page at LingQ is all of a sudden has fewer blue words, more white words, even new content that I bring in, even difficult content from Al Jazeera, lots of white words. That's how it's almost like a magic process, but it's not one of memorizing. Thanks, gotta go early, bye for now. How can we go to Dutch? I live normally in Vancouver, but right now I'm in Palm Springs, California, because my wife doesn't like Vancouver when it rains all the time. How do you correct these complicated mistakes when it comes to Slavic languages? I'm going to find that out. One thing I did not have before is the mini stories. The mini stories focus on verbs. A lot of the problems in Slavic languages relate to verbs of motion, aspects of verbs, and even the case endings that relate to verbs. And so I'm going to listen to these mini stories in Russian and Ukrainian, possibly Polish, with greater attention to the endings and stuff like that, to try to get used to them more so that they become more natural to me. It's not a matter of the explanations. I've seen the explanations many, many times. It's a matter of developing habits. And I'm going to end up in Lviv, Ukraine, at the Ukrainian Language and Culture School there that I visited a couple of years ago. And we're going to have an intensive period to see if I can be, elevated. I might even ask the school there to give me a rating on the Common European Framework. Am I B1, B2? Where am I in my Ukrainian and Russian? So we will see, Sophia. How useful is reading out loud? I don't read out loud, but some people like to do it. Hi from El Salvador. Hi from Costa Rica. Thanks, Steve. How to avoid jumping from language to language without the language core? I don't understand the question. If you are learning for enjoyment, as I do, then you move on when you move on. And I will probably, my plan is to sort of get back to my Slavic languages at the end of April. That means I will leave Persian and Arabic in a very unfinished low level. But that's what I'm intending to do. And I will go back to them, as I will go back to Korean. That's my plan starting in June, which I left at a sort of an intermediate level. So you can get back to them whenever you want, unless you have to do them for school or for your work or whatever. What do you think about monolingual dictionaries? I don't use them because I really want just a quick hint as to what a word means so that I can stay in the content that I'm using, that I'm reading, that I'm listening to. I don't want to go to a monolingual dictionary where I have to look up even more words to understand the explanation. I just want a quick suggestion of what maybe this word means, and then I look back into the content that I'm using and I try to figure out, and it might be fuzzy, it might be incorrect, it all doesn't matter, because in the long run, through more and more exposure, more and more of the sort of scope of these words and meaning of these words is going to become clear to me. Oh, thank you, Sophia. I hope to have a good week ahead. How to build language core. I don't know what language core is, but I'm not a proponent of the idea that you sort of master anything. You build your language capability, your potential through massive exposure to the language. Do you think that writing can help thinking of the language, and with that help you speak easily? Yeah, writing is a great thing to do. It's not something that I do because it requires a lot of patience. It's easier just to speak, but obviously when you are writing, you take more time, you look things up, you make a greater effort to use the language correctly. It's certainly a good thing to do. I wrote when I studied Chinese. Bonjour Steve, je voulais savoir si l'apprentissage de l'hébreu vous a aidé pour l'apprentissage de l'arabe. Has did Hebrew help me with Arabic? It was my first exposure to Semitic languages, going from right to left, but I did so little Hebrew that I don't think it had any major impact on my Arabic. I'm going to see my friend's new Hungarian family now, so I have challenged myself to learn some conversational Hungarian in 3 months. Good for you. We do have someone who has promised to provide us with mini stories in Hungarian. If we get those, we will upload Hungarian. Okay, how old were you when you started getting interested in languages? Yeah, it's probably a good thing. I had the opportunity to travel. I studied in France. I think it is an advantage, but I don't think it's a condition. Oh, fan. Okay, thank you. You seem to be very sharp and fit for a 73-year-old. What exercise do you do? How often? And do you think exercise affects your language learning? From Pear. Yeah, in terms of, I like to do something every day. So, here in Palm Springs, where I live, we have a little gym. I go down there. I vary it between sort of stepper, treadmill, weights, that kind of thing. I might jump in their outdoor pool and swim. Then I have other routines that I do, for example, where I have a routine where I do, push-ups, running on the spot, squats, running on the spot, burpees, running on the spot, plank. So that's 4 items. And then I do that 4 times. I have other, I try to vary it up, but just to try to get in half an hour, 45 minutes, sometimes 15 minutes a day, but try to do it almost every day. I don't jog as much because I get very stiff IT bands, and since I'm too lazy to stretch, I end up feeling very stiff when I run. So I run sometimes, but not too often. I used to run a lot more. Do you try to memorize verb conjugations to speak with people in grammar rules, or you just read and listen and grasp it in that way? Yeah, verb conjugations certainly are a problem. I don't memorize them. I have tried, and verb conjugations or declension tables in German or Slavic languages, it's the same idea. It's a table of different endings. And I have found it difficult to memorize them. But, at LingQ, we do have sort of a grammar tab. We have dictionaries which take you to these tables. Context Reverso is very good in that regard. Other conjugating dictionaries. So when I see a form of a word, I will sometimes go to the table, see where it fits in the table, come back to the text. So I think this sort of sporadic exposure to the conjugation tables gradually helps you to get a better sense. I also save phrases. I try to listen for the phrase so that these things start to become more natural. I think it's a bit like tones in Chinese. It's very difficult to nail them on the fly if you're sort of dealing with them as individual units. You have to kind of deal with it as part of longer phrases. Blah, blah, blah. Do you try to memorize? Okay, how many languages are you a C2 at? I don't know. I don't know if I'm, the only one that I would be close to C2 in is French. So a high C1 maybe in French, then Japanese and Mandarin, sort of a high B2, low C1, I think. I don't know. I've never had myself tested. Keith Hamilton, I'm a teacher in Dnipro. I'm going to be in Dnipro on the 16th to 18th of May. If you want to get together, we can have a cup of coffee. Okay, do you understand every word? No, but I think it's useful to listen. If you're going to do a listening marathon, I guess there's 2 situations. One is material where you understand 80-90%, and so then you're focusing on the structure of the language. But I also have listened to material where I only understand 20%, 30%, because I simply like the tone, the voice, the sort of musicality of it. But in that case, I do want to get to the text so I can look up the words. For example, my 5 hours of listening was mini stories where I basically knew I was listening to them all for the 10th, 15th time. Is it possible to learn German in 1 year? Yes. Is it okay to start with SML as a basic fundamental learning language? Sure. In fact, I find all of those starter books are equal. Do you think it would be beneficial to intentionally take a 1 to 2 month break when you're learning a really tough language, or should you keep pushing? I mean, it depends. If you're getting frustrated, then you should take a break. Otherwise, the more you do, the faster you'll get there. After how long did it start comfortable? Well, I can't answer that question. I can't answer, but at one point I gave up trying to memorize the conjugation or the declension tables, and I went out and found secondhand bookstores in Vancouver and found cassette tapes and lots of content, and listened and read, and these were textbooks with, you know, word lists, and I just exposed myself to more and more of the language, and in a month I felt more comfortable. What languages are spoken in Vancouver? Lots, you know, Chinese, Farsi, Tagalog, of course, English. A question out of this: what kind of food do you eat? Well, I eat all kinds of food. I like fish. I like vegetables. I'm not a big meat eater, but I do eat some meat. I eat, you know, obviously Western food, French food, whatever, you know, continental cuisine. I'm not a big fan of fast food. Try to keep it healthy. For those who want to improve English vocabulary, search for power of words. Okay, Steve, I have a 180-day streak on LingQ. What do you think of that? Very good. How many languages do you speak? You know, I think I can speak 10 or 12 quite easily, and the others I would need to work on. Hello, is studying 3 to 4 hours a day effective? Yes, the more you study, the more you will learn, the faster you will improve. Okay, I am going to stop here. Thank you very much. And what do I think of Luca Lampariello? He is a phenomenal polyglot and a very nice guy. Okay, was it hard to not confuse Arabic and Persian? I don't confuse them. In fact, if anything, the Arabic words in Persian are helpful, makes it easier to remember them. Students in China are having difficulty joining LingQ in China without using a VPN. Any solutions? Cheers from Shenyang. I have no solutions. That's a very technical thing. I will mention it to our technical people, but I don't know that there is any solution to that. Okay. Yeah, vielen Dank, Herr Kaufmann. Schönen Tag. No. Okay. That's it. Bye for now.